Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic night, has had a wonderful and safe last 48 hours. Pat yourselves in the back, you made it through yet another successful week. Congratulations. And so, as we get ready to move here into the weekend, we do have 48 hours worth of the top breaking news coming out from all over the globe, with, of course, a primary focus being inside of Ukraine. There's been a ton of stuff that has happened over the last 48 hours, and usually when it comes to the news, as we all know, it's generally not very good stuff. A lot of this is kind of, well, depressing, to say the least. But it's because it's a lot of things like natural disasters or conflicts or just a lot of people suffering from a lot of different things. Luckily, when it comes to a lot of this, you can have an impact, and this whole community can. Because here at the New News, we're the news that gives back. 100% of everything we do is charity-driven. We really do not want to profit off of other people's misery. So 100% of everything we do is charity-driven. And the whole point of this project is to help raise money for different organizations all over the world to help people that are affected by the very same news stories we're talking about. And it's also to bring awareness to you of those different situations. So please, if you can, please check out the video description below and check out all the different organizations down there. And all of them, 80% or more of the donations that they actually end up receiving, they actually sit to their program. So 80% or more goes to their programs and actually goes to helping people, not just paying. The majority of it isn't just paying for things like salaries and administration's costs and whatnot. So please, if you can't give a lot to those organizations, please give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is help us grow this project and grow this channel and to grow the awareness that's out there. So please, if you can, give us a like, give us a subscribe, let your friends know about us, share us in amongst your communities, whichever you may be in a part of. And the more people that come here, the more of an impact we will have, and the more money we'll be able to raise overall to help more people throughout the world. And I can't think of a better cause to support. And you're also getting informed when the situations like going throughout the world. We try to remain for those that may be new here, we try to remain apolitical and unbiased. We do, however, have a very clearly stated bias for Ukraine, just because we simply cannot morally, with any kind of a sense of a moral compass, support what's ongoing with the Russian war of aggression there. So as we get ready to move into the news itself, I very much implore you to please ask questions if you're joining us, if you're here with us live tonight. I am watching the live chat, and I will be responding to comments and questions that are made throughout the duration of the stream, and I'll try to answer them as best as I physically can. To give you a little bit of a background on myself, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I was an 0352 anti-tank missileman and a corporal serving with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. I did 2 tours overseas. My first tour between October of 2017 and March of 2018. I deployed to Syria, where I assisted Special Operations Forces and our SDF partners with providing support for the fight against the Islamic State, and also deterrence against Russian and Assad forces there along the middle Euphrates River Valley. My second deployment, I was there. I went back to the Middle East between October of 2019 and March of 2020, where I served as the Javelin team leader for the Crisis Response Company out of Kuwait. I then was one of the 100 Marines that deployed to the Baghdad Embassy compound on New Year's of 2020, where I oversaw all anti-armor operations for the Baghdad Embassy. I then went to Saudi Arabia and into the Red Sea, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines, before they ended up deploying to fight Houthi rebels there in Yemen as part of the Middle Eastern Coalition. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I'm a fully cross-trained machiner, and I am also a CLS qualified Marine, a fully cross-trained rifleman, and I am also a partially cross-trained radio operator. I can provide a lot of basic information at a small unit leadership level and tactical level. I've never been formally trained in anything on the strategic level, and I do try to keep well-rounded, however, with a lot of different things that I have just very great interest in, things such as economics, things such as geopolitics, history, that kind of stuff. However, I'm not an expert in any of those fields. So please, with anything, subject matter expert or not, I always implore you as a viewer, if something interests you or you want to learn more about it, please always do your own research. It's imperative that you do your own research to get well versed in these kinds of topics and to understand what we're really talking about. A lot of these points we're hitting on rather lightly as we're going through here. There's just so much to cover in each of these individual stories that we simply do not have time to dive deep into all of them. So please do your own research if any of these interest you want to know more, and that goes subject matter expertise or not. So don't listen to what everyone says on the internet. Rule of the internet 101. And with that, we get ready to dive right in here into Ukraine and really the gist of the news of the night, of course, where we still have active combat ongoing throughout the duration or throughout the entirety of Ukraine, specifically within that Donbass, within and the southern areas of the country where the heaviest fighting is ongoing. We also have a lot of information tonight coming out of Kyiv. We have a couple of different points here. The first one is the fact that 2.3 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine have been delivered through UNICEF to Ukraine. This is the Pfizer BioNTech vaccines that were supplied by the United States through COVAX. And so we're actually getting that one from the Kyiv Independent. They're out of Kyiv itself, who are reporting this. This is also according to the Ukraine's Ministry of Health. We also get an update and kind of all together what we end up seeing. What we see is this story kind of wrapping up all together to where we're getting some official numbers coming out from the Ukrainian government of just how many prisoners have been exchanged and have returned home at this point. And so far, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 28 exchanges of prisoners between Ukraine and Russia have taken place. 978 Ukrainian citizens have been returned home. There are 879 servicemen and 999 civilians among them. And that's coming from the press service of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. However, we do get a solemn update coming out of Kyiv, and that solemn update is regarding war crimes. War crimes have been perpetrated on a scale really unprecedented in the last 70 years inside of Europe. The closest you can think of in modern era would be, dare I say, it would be Yugoslavia. The breakup of Yugoslavia, which turned into a multitude of different states, most notably Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Kosovo. That involved a lot of ethnic cleansing on both sides, mostly perpetrated by the Serbian government. So that's that's really the closest thing that we've seen in the last 30 years in Europe. Past that, it's really the biggest thing that we've truly seen since the end of World War II, where a lot of atrocities occurred, obviously, during World War II, mostly committed by those of the Axis powers, but we also know that a lot of them were committed also by Allied powers, both American, British, Russian, especially Russians, or the Soviets at the time. And this war is no different at this point, where such a horrendous amount of war crimes have been committed that it truly is crimes against humanity, if going by the 1993 Rome Statute and also the 1949 Geneva Conventions and their subsequent additional protocols. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russian troops have committed almost 40,000 war crimes against Ukraine and its citizens. That's coming from Katerina Pavlichenko, who's the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. So that is a significant amount of war crimes. This is war crimes really unprecedented in scope and scale. To get to this point, you really does bring into questions of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and of course crimes against humanity. This is so. War crimes have been perpetrated by both sides. I want to make that very clear. It is a war, and the reality is that in war, both sides will perpetrate war crimes and break the Geneva Conventions. However, there's a scope and a scale to that must be recognized. And while even the United Nations, in its independent investigation into Ukraine and the areas that it has been able to get to, have clearly stated that both sides did commit war crimes, those listed by the Ukrainian forces really just ended up as a footnote. There's so few of them. There are so few documented cases that can be independently verified. Whereas for the Russians, the multitude is insane. It's horrendous to even think about, and they're even questioning the scope of this as well. Now, a lot of things a lot of these in war, you can usually chalk it down to, most of the time with a conflict, no matter how horrendous, it usually gets chalked down to a tragedy that really shouldn't ever happen again. This is beyond that. This is beyond what you would consider a tragedy and warfare and conflict and a waste of just human life. It has moved far beyond that. It has moved into the realm of genocide. If we go by the 1993, once again, the 1993 Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court, which provides a legal definition, and you can get this off of the United Nations website, or if you go to the Protocol 1, or if you go to Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, of course, 1949 Geneva Conventions, then you can see that that is where the legal definition of this does occur. And every single thing, there's multiple things that make up genocide: transfer of children from a group to another group, killing of the individuals of a certain group, creating conditions of life that are not, or creating conditions which are not sustainable of life of the group, causing mental and physical harm of the group, preventing births within a group. All of those checkmarked when it comes to the Russians, very clearly checkmarked. That's really the concerning part, and that's really what the International Criminal Court and many nations and the United Nations are actually going through and investigating right now. And that's very clearly evident by what Ukraine is stating here, and what we're finding is that this is true. The majority of what's being stated here is very much true, and it is believed that number will be much higher, as well as the civilian casualties of this war, which is a caveat that the United Nations also puts out regarding its confirmed civilian casualties, is the numbers are considerably higher than what they are able to confirm. So very tragic, very, very terrible situation here in Ukraine, especially when it comes to the amount of war crimes ongoing throughout this region. As we jump over here, this is just outside of Kharkiv, in the area of Barova. And we do have a question here, actually. Coming from Barbara Christina. Good to see you back there, Barbara. I'm always happy to see you back. Anyway, she says, often wonder how many families who fled Ukraine in the beginning and lost touch with their family members and still living abroad do not know whether one they love is buried in a mass grave. That's really getting into the heartstring part of it. The fact of the matter is that over 7 million Ukrainians, which is roughly about 13% of Ukraine's population, have fled the country and are currently living abroad as refugees. At this point, that many people, there's not a single person in Ukraine that has not been affected by the war personally. This war is so widespread, there is not a single part of the country which has not really been hit in some way, shape, or form, whether that's the ballistic missile strikes, or someone of their family has gone to the front lines, or what have you. Everyone in the country of Ukraine has been devastated by this war in one way or another. And there is still a significant part of Ukraine which is occupied. We're talking about places such as Mariupol. These are cities with hundreds of thousands of people that live in them. And so it's almost guaranteed that everyone at somewhere has a family member who they are related to from these cities that they don't have contact with. There are people these people lived in Donetsk and Luhansk and Zaporizhia and in Kherson for an extended period of time, and a lot of them, especially older family members who really didn't have anywhere to go or were unable to evacuate, they ended up staying behind. Because at this point, after 8 years of conflict, they thought that they had seen war. How much worse could it possibly be? Well, it turns out considerably worse than what was ongoing for the past 8 years. As hard as that is to believe, considerably worse. It's an active genocide against these people, which is considerably worse in and of itself than just a war. It's the intent to destroy Ukraine as an identity, not as just a country in and of itself, but as an identity of a people, and which is what we're seeing in the areas of the currently occupied by the Russians. So the likelihood that there is a family member in a mass grave somewhere is unfortunately very high. That is not to scare anyone or make anyone depressed. There are a lot of people that have survived, obviously, but the reality is that so many people have been killed and unfortunately the worst of what we have seen so far as far as atrocities are concerned. It's very the Ukrainians as well as the international community are expecting it to be considerably worse in areas such as Mariupol, Melitopol, Kherson itself, Donetsk, that really anywhere that the Russians have had any kind of occupational presence for a significant amount of time. We can see what they did in just a few months in places such as Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, even all the way up by Chernobyl. We can see what they've done in the Kharkiv Oblast already. And it's going to be considerably worse in areas like Mariupol and a lot of the Donetsk Oblast. So the world kind of has to prepare for that, I think, very much so mentally. But unfortunately, a lot of people. And that's really the heartbreaking part, because there's nothing you can do until these areas become liberated. Anyway, continuing here, we get over here to Borova, where we have two different pieces of news, including the headline of the night. So the first piece of news actually comes from the United Nations operating here inside of Ukraine and supplying a lot of things for humanitarian aid. And what we see is 8,000 people received humanitarian aid from the United Nations. And what we're seeing is, quote, so the UN distributed aid for about 80,000 people in Barova, which is here in the Kharkiv Oblast. The aid filled 10 trucks in total, and it has items including hygiene products, bedding, jerry cans for fuel and water, kitchen supplies, shelter materials, foodstuffs, water, and a whole lot more. And we're seeing, we're seeing, especially from the Red Cross side, which I don't have a lot, I don't post a lot of because it's very repetitive. But the Red Cross, both the Federation of the Red Cross and the International Committee of the Red Cross, they are different. But both of those organizations are heavily focused on bringing lumber and repair materials and shelter construction materials, because most of Russia's war is based on a doctrine of scorched earth. It's a scorched earth tactics that we're really seeing. Really emphasis on heavy artillery bombardment to just annihilate entire cities. Bakhmut, Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, Mariupol, and we continue to see that all throughout areas that were occupied. And the heavy fighting that took place to liberate these definitely already did a number on them. And so a lot of these people, they already do not have electricity, gas, running water. Many of them have gone months without medication. And with that, the winter is getting ready to set in, and these regions are already getting significantly colder. We're starting to see the Rasputitsa mud starting to set in certain parts of Ukraine, and that's really going to come in here in November. Now, it's supposed to be a little bit warmer than, it's expected to be a little bit warmer than it was last year, which is definitely going to bog things down, because that permafrost, that rehardening of the ground that happens in the middle of winter that allows for maneuver warfare again, is really not going to set in until what is expected to be a little bit later this year, which could make it very difficult for either side. But those conditions, those freezing conditions, are going to allow for people that need these things, that need these vital infrastructure requirements of food and gas for heating, and electricity if they can't get gas, for electric heaters, and running water for just basic survival needs. You need clean drinking water. You can survive up to 2 weeks without food. You can only survive 3 days without water. But we're seeing an emphasis of getting these buildings prepared for the winter, or at least better prepared than what we have seen so far. And you can see them unloading some of these supplies here. This is in Borova. This is coming from the United Nations, or the OCHA in Ukraine. That's the United Nations for providing basically assistance, humanitarian assistance. See a lot of bedding and stuff coming out here. But it's quite a significant amount of humanitarian aid coming here. And it's a lot of work, too. A lot of work is being done to fix these houses up as best as they can before the cold truly does set in, to give these people, honestly, the best chance of survival, period. Because a lot of people, it's a worry that a lot of people could freeze to death this winter. because they don't have these essential services. And the big news is here in Borova, which is also depending on the dialect, Boriv, in the Kharkiv Oblast. And we see that according to the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, they say that they discovered a mass grave here just outside the city of Barova, and they're currently going through and exhuming it. So far, they have determined that at least 17 people are buried in this grave. And Barova is not a very large. It's not a very large village. It's not a very large town. You can see them exhuming this mass grave. They've already pulled at least a couple of individuals here, which they are currently, examining, doing their preliminary examination. A lot of these individuals they're in a state of decomposition that would make it difficult to identify them. If that makes sense. But it's being recorded. The National Police of Ukraine are there. You can see they're exhuming multiple individuals. They already have a couple of filled body bags here. And once again, it's at least 17 people. As I said, at least 17 people. Could be more. Such as what we saw in places such as Sverdlovsk and in Le Mans. So, unfortunately, yeah, another mass grave found in Ukraine. That starts to bring us down here. There have been advances from our understanding within the Luhansk Oblast, but the fighting is very bitter, and when it comes to a lot of these areas where we're seeing a lot of active combat, Ukraine has requested a media blackout over several different areas, specifically in areas such as Luhansk and areas around the Kherson Oblast. There is some bits and pieces and video footage that are attributed to coming out of the Kherson Oblast, but we aren't heavily reporting on it because we're trying to respect that request, because that is based off of an operational security standpoint for Ukraine. And two, it's verify it. How well can we verify this information? And there's not a lot of information to tell us what is actually happening in the battle space to give us some meaningful understanding. It's basically a lot of small bits of combat footage. We saw a vehicle destroyed here. A vehicle was destroyed here of this type. Not a lot of tactical information. And despite the fact that Ukraine has released an information saying that over 90 settlements have been liberated within that region. So, of the Kherson Oblast. The Luhansk Oblast is also seeing a counteroffensive here, and we know it's being relatively successful. The Russians are trying to throw everything they can at it. This is over Lysychansk. This is Russian forces here in Lysychansk who are watching the sky as Russian fighter aircraft are flying overhead as they're headed here very close by to the front lines. They're coming here and they're they're using a pretty heavy bombardment via their air force to try and slow the Ukrainian advance, which is creeping in on Lysychansk, not lost, but just a couple of months ago by Ukrainian forces during the major battles there for both Lysychansk and Severodonetsk that essentially led to the capture of the entire Luhansk Oblast. That counteroffensive is ongoing. We do not know quite the extent of it. The last updates we had were on Wednesday, and those had been very long awaited and came from Sergei Hede, who is the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration. We simply do not have any additional information coming out today that states that anything has moved tactically there on the ground. But we do see that the Russians are trying to throw everything they can to slow this advance, if nothing else. Take a look. So that is Russian jets flying there over the city of Lysychansk there in Luhansk Oblast as they head over to bomb Ukrainian positions as they continue to advance towards that city, as well as the city of Svatove here into the north, and also over up towards Kreminna coming out of the Lyman. As we head over here, Kramatorsk was shelled once again. Ukrainian-held city of Kramatorsk currently serves as the de facto head of the government for the Ukrainian side. The city of Donetsk itself is under Russian occupation and has been for quite some considerable time. In fact, it was under occupation by Russian-backed separatist forces prior to the beginning of the invasion on February the 24th. Since then, Kramatorsk really serves as the de facto head of government within the Ukrainian-controlled area, and as such, it's also a very key strategic location. It's also a very key supply point, and we see it being shelled very mercilessly by the Russians. That has somewhat stopped. I wouldn't say entirely stopped, but for the most part has stopped, as the successes on the battlefield to the north and Lyman put a lot of artillery systems out of range. But we are seeing that they are still, in fact, shelling. We do not know at this point if there were any casualties. I'm not seeing any at this point. And none have been announced by Pavlo Korolenko, who's the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. However, at least one of the sites we do know was one of the sites set up by USAID, which is the United States humanitarian aid provider, a government organization which provides humanitarian aid. And we can see some of the destruction of these warehouses. It would appear that these were mostly warehouses housing vehicles. You can actually see part of a vehicle on the inside there. But you can also see here, and you can see the placard right there on the wall, the USAID. So that is the U.S. government agency that provides humanitarian aid to different countries throughout the world. So the likelihood is that this location actually had humanitarian aid inside of it and was being used to provide humanitarian aid throughout the Donetsk Oblast as one of their regional centers, which makes sense. Kramatorsk is the place to do that. We also hear of a couple of different updates. So we got our daily Donetsk update coming from Pavlo Korolenko. He provides this at 8 a.m. every morning, and it covers the prior 24 hours. So we have the updates for the which came out yesterday and today, which cover the 26th and the 27th. And the first one is, quote, on October the 26th, number of victims of Russian army and Donetsk Oblast increased by 3 killed, 2 injured. Every Russian will pay for his crimes in Ukraine. And we do have that. This is his update regarding Twitter, where we're pulling this. And we see that the shelling occurred there mostly in places such as Bakhmut, and also up here at Yampolivka. 3 dead and 2 injured. And the latest coming out this morning and covering all of what happened yesterday. Quit on October 27th, number of victims of Russian army and Donetsk Oblast increased by 9 killed, 9 injured. Every Russian will pay for his crimes in Ukraine. Once again, we can see coming out at 8 a.m. local time today. And so far, that brings up, according to Pavlo Korolenko and the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, they are stating that since the beginning of the Russian Federation's invasion on February the 24th, at least 1,112 people have been killed and 2,483 injured. This does not include areas within occupied regions such as Mariupol or Volnovakha. And the atrocities do continue. Burial sites were found. Additional burial sites have been found, and body exhumation does continue. Quote, the Ukrainian law enforcement officers have already found 83 burial sites with Ukrainian citizens killed by Russian occupiers in liberated territories of the Donetsk region. That's coming from Alexandra Havreliko, who is the press officer of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. And now we see, quote, on October 27th, Ukrainian law enforcement officers have found 268 dead bodies of Ukrainian citizens killed by Russian occupiers in the liberated territories of the Donetsk region. 146 bodies have been exhumed. So that is the full sets of statements coming there from Alexandra Havrilko of the Donetsk Regional Police. So once again, significant amounts of atrocities committed, and these are graves that were created under Russian occupation. A lot of times, these individuals show signs of torture, summary execution, and usually, several of them, many of them, will have their hands tied behind their backs. So move over here into Bakhmut. We see that the Ukrainian army is providing what aid they can. The city of Bakhmut is simply too embattled to provide humanitarian aid through other means, such as the Red Cross or such as the United Nations. The city is obliterated. It is nothing more than rubble at this point. Every single building in the city has been damaged or destroyed by Russian shelling. It's been very merciless for months now. And we see at this point that it's just still too dangerous. It's still too close to the front lines, and it's still receiving too much shelling for other organizations to come in here and provide any meaningful humanitarian relief efforts. As a result, Ukrainian forces are providing them themselves with whatever little supplies they can spare here along the front lines, and here in the heavily embattled town of Bakhmut. We see a couple of young Ukrainian girls actually receiving, in this video, humanitarian aid and different things from Ukrainian troops there as they are passing through the city. Take a look.
Чекай, в мене ще солодощі є, тримайте. Я вам дам.
Хто свічки?
Да. Що?
Ми ще лишимося до днів, у нас ще батарейки лишилися.
Ну тільки обережно.
Тільки скажіть, що ми поїхали, оплатіть.
Я понял,
Напиши,
напишу
на
так.
зв'язок, напиши.
Тримайте вам шоколадки.
Спасибо большое.
Все, будь ласка. Все, ви ховайтесь, тут не сидіть.
You know, they got some stuff that they brought with them just for this purpose, but I mean, he's pulling snacks and stuff out of his field bag, like that stuff he's taking with him to the front lines, right? Like he's pulling stuff out of his assault pack that he has, he brought for himself, because no one's bringing stuff into the city. There is no gas, there's no electricity, there's no running water, there's nothing. These people, and it's still too close to the front line, and it's been like this for months. These people require humanitarian aid. I mean, they need help, and it's just too dangerous that no organization is willing to go into this region. They're not willing to go here because it's so kinetic. It's too dangerous for humanitarian aid workers, at least as these groups see it. And as a result, the Ukrainian army is having to supplement it to the best of their ability with whatever they can on hand, and that's not always easy. I mean, this is an area with an ongoing active combat, very heavy shelling, very heavy, bitter fighting between Ukrainian forces and the Wagner group. And their logistics convoys, they're worried about making sure that fight can continue and that Bakhmut isn't lost. They do not have the logistical capability, unfortunately, to supply both the Ukrainian army and to do humanitarian aid runs. It's just not. You can choose one or you can choose the other. And of course, Ukraine has to go with making sure that city is defended, so that way these people do not fall into Russian occupation, which we know is a death sentence for many of them. And some of that heavy fighting we can see kind of continue here. The heavy fighting between the Russian Wagner group and Ukrainian forces does continue around the areas of Bakhmut and Soledar. The Wagner group has reportedly had very high casualties and has been slowly pushed back away from the city of Bakhmut itself, with urban fighting currently ongoing in areas around places such as Soledar. There was some pretty graphic evidence of those heavy losses. We did not post it here for very obvious reasons, but you just don't need to see it. But there is video evidence going around where you can see the heavy losses that Wagner has taken, very brutally. So, but here's just a small video for you. I see some of those losses here as we're driving down the road. Yes. You know, you're usually not supposed to put your logistical trucks right on the front line. Move down here and into, we're going to work our way back towards the front here. Well, this is the city of Shakhtarsk, where an oil depot did continue to burn and does continue to burn. Roughly 12 silos worth of oil did end up combusting and catching fire. It's reported that additional explosions occurred on the city on the 27th. These appear to have sparked a railway fire. This railway fire, of course, had fuel cars there and sitting in the city of Shakhtarsk. Shakhtarsk has been hit before. Shakhtarsk is also the supposed launching location of Russian missile batteries, Tochka-U batteries, that fired that infamous Tochka-U, which struck the railway depot several months ago in the city of Kramatorsk and killed about 52 civilians awaiting evacuation there. So this has been a target for quite a significant amount of time, and these HIMARS missiles and precision weaponry really is doing a number on Russian logistical capabilities. This is severely degrading for the Russian forces. Severely degrading. We can actually see another one here. This is coming from the 27th, saying that more explosions, at least 3 more, had occurred there in Shakhtarsk. We do not know if that was additional strikes or if those were sympathetic detonations, meaning that the fire had spread and caused more detonations. But what we do know is there was significant damage to the fuel cars here on the railway, significant warping of the railway, and this is Russia relies on rail infrastructure to actually provide heavy amounts of logistics. They're very dependent on railheads, and destroying railways really cripples the Russian capability to continue fighting the war. And so this is a very, very important strike. This is a very important damage, and it's going to affect how well the Russians can actually effectively supply their forces on the front lines as these very brutal, bitter battles are happening all across the Donetsk Oblast's front line right now. So not getting that those logistical capabilities being absolutely crippled could actually make or break how those battles turn out. And that's we're going to see some of those subsequent actions, I think, over the next couple of weeks as the ramifications of a strike like this really start to rear their head on the front lines here. But take a look at some of the damage here onto the railhead. And coming from a Russian reporter.
Пожар. Железнодорожная станция здесь полыхала. Несколько часов, 15 цистерн с бензином. Бензин, топливо не для военной техники, поэтому била украинская артиллерия, вернее ракетами, скорее всего хаймерсами, потому что Шахтерск это такой тыловой город, 50 километров от Донецка, и вот потушили. Удивительно, что не первый раз на месте, там где полыхали цистерны, практически сказать на глаз, что тут что-то горело, всегда сложно, но полыхало знатно. До сих пор пахнет бензином, гарью. Вот здания соседние, которые были рядом с пожаром. Вот сейчас за моей спиной вот. Сейчас здесь эксперты работают, осколки везде валяются. Очередной удар по инфраструктуре, бьют метко, к сожалению. Вот сейчас выясняем по поводу жертв. Вот здание, которое рядом находилось, выгоревшее. все эти следы ночного пожара. Причем температура была такой силы, что пути железнодорожные просто... Сейчас, вот, если видно будет, все это вот они деформировались. Ночного пожара.
So he's kind of giving us a little bit of an overview of some of the damage ongoing there, but that is coming from a Russian journalist there in Shakhtarsk. We do see Russian equipment being pushed to the front lines coming through the Donetsk Oblast today, most of these being on flatbed trucks, armored vehicles mostly, tanks, T-72s, T-62s, T-80s, that kind of series of T-series tanks. I didn't bother armor IDing them. And this is could be twofold. At this point, it's suspected that the Russians could be fielding a large quantity, or they could be getting ready to field a much larger quantity of those conscripts. So this could be one of two things at this point. We do not know which. We do know that Russian forces, especially in areas, like I said, in Bakhmut, where the Wagner group has been in very brutal and very bitter fighting with Ukrainian forces in areas such as Soledar, Bakhmutsky, and over in Bakhmut as well, that they have suffered very significant losses. So it could be that these troops are headed up. This equipment is headed up to replace a lot of those material losses that they have taken. But the other option is the fact that Russia could be fielding a large quantity of its conscripts here very shortly. Those conscripted troops, that mass mobilization we saw, could be starting to see much larger numbers of them actually reaching the battlefield. We know a lot of them already did very early on, where they were immediately needed, but there was still a lot that were going through at least a very short training pipeline cycle and an outfitting cycle. So we could see that. So the other option than troop replacement here is the fact that they could be concentrating forces in an area that we just aren't aware of yet, or to possibly either launch an offensive or bolster defenses in an area to make it very difficult for Ukrainian troops to actually actually successfully conduct a counteroffensive in any of these regions. Either way, we do know that significant amounts of Russian equipment is pushing its way through the Donetsk Oblast. Take a look. You can see that there. T-series tanks headed down there, flatbedded on trucks. This is because tanks use an insane amount of fuel. So it is much more fuel efficient, logistically speaking, to have them on flatbed trucks and only run them once they get to the front on their own power. It's just much less fuel intensive. To give you an idea, the M1, A1, A2 Abrams tanks require 10 gallons of fuel just to start the engine. Let's see what kind of T-series tanks we got here. That is a... pretty sure that's a T-72. Yes, I'm going to say that's a T-72, and I'm going to say that's a T-72B3. Yes. As far as I can tell, with the quick armor ID. Over here in Avdiivka sits here. It's a suburb of the city of Donetsk, really. It lies just on the outskirts of the city. It's just to the northwest of the city of Donetsk itself. And Donetsk is the regional capital of the Donetsk Oblast. It's been under Russian separatists and now direct Russian occupation for quite some time now. In fact, before the invasion itself. But Avdiivka, having these troops, Pisky was the same thing down here to the southwest of the city, or southwest, south central of the city. And what we see is Russian forces are trying to push Ukrainian forces further away from the city of Donetsk itself in order to really relieve some pressure on its logistical command and communication structures there in the city, because that is what that city is. That's what a lot of that city has. Same thing with Makivka right next door. But it's a lot of pressure on this area. I mean, you have Ukrainian troops just on the outside of the city. So Russian forces have been mercilessly shelling Ukrainian positions and the city of Avdiivka for quite some time now. and they are using very heavy amounts of Air Force bombardment. They're using a lot of their Air Force to really strike at these positions and try and just completely demoralize Avdiivka and the Ukrainian troops that are still there in their trenches. These are, in this region, the fighting has been ongoing for roughly 8 years now, and at this point, what we end up seeing is the fact that both sides are in very well entrenched defensive positions that have been built upon and built upon and built upon and built upon for years now. It makes it extremely difficult to mount any kind of an assault on these positions with any kind of hopeful chance of success without taking unsustainable losses. Not to say that the Russians already don't, but unacceptable losses, I think, is the word I'm truly looking for there. And so we do see a lot of aerial bombardment. We have been seeing a very large increase in Russian aerial bombardment over the last few days, about the last week and a half. We're expecting that pace of Russian aerial bombardment to continue as the Russians are starting to have issues with their stockpiles in other areas. So we take a look at some of that here. This is an Su-25s over the city of, these are Russian Su-25s over the city of Avdiivka, conducting airstrikes on Ukrainian positions. And we can tell that it's an Su-25. Generally speaking, the Russians, with their Air Force, it's not like the United States. It's not like the United States or NATO, where a lot of our aircraft are multi-role, meaning that both the aircraft's carrying both air-to-air and air-to-ground munitions, or they could be opted for either air-to-air flight coverage, or they can be opted for air to ground, where they have that ability to do one or the other, and they're equally as successful in both. The Russians go for a separate type of airframe. So they have certain jets which are air to air, but they're meant for air supremacy. Whereas certain jets are then also built that are meant only for close air support. So which is why you see for the Russians, you see them using the Su-25, and that will conduct a lot of air to ground missions, but you're not really going to see any MiG-29s or anything flying those air to ground missions, those close air support missions for the Russians, because their jets aren't built for that. That's not the point of their jets. The Ukrainians are using them in a little bit more of a versatile role, but that's more or less out of necessity, as they do not have a numbers advantage when it comes to available airframes that the Russians do. So that's kind of what we're seeing, but it's very interesting to see, because these aircraft aren't very Russian aircraft are not very flexible in their mission capabilities, and you really see the detriment to that in some cases here for the Russians, because they have a limited type. They have a limited type and a limited number of those airframes that they can use for these roles, and a lot of times they're just not efficient in their actual roles. They're very much obsolete at this point in a lot of ways, and they're very analog compared to a lot of our systems. They simply do not have the precision capabilities, nor do they have the optics packages on their airframes to really do significant damage to Ukrainian forces. They're still very dangerous, but they're not as dangerous as, say, a NATO aircraft would be, and it's in the same position. Bookham40 asks, do you think F-16s are good ground attack aircraft? I think F-16s are good at ground attack aircraft. Now, the best ground attack aircraft in the world is the A-10, hands down. Hands down, best ground attack aircraft, fixed wing aircraft in the world, A-10. It is a legend. It will be a legend. It is hands down the best ground attack aircraft platform you can ever think of. But the F-16 is a multi-role fighter aircraft. It's a little bit older, but it is a very good aircraft. Very successful for air supremacy. The F-16s, during the Battle of Qashm, the F-16s actually did fly close air support missions during the Battle of Qashm back in 2018, February 7th of 2018. And so we did have quite a significant number of F-16s as well as F-18s, C-130 gunships, MQ-9 Reaper drones, Predator drones, as well as a multitude of other aircraft available to us, basically anything in the area. But the F-16s were providing, especially against the Islamic State and in that middle Euphrates River Valley, the F-16s from the Air Force were providing a lot of air covers. They're providing a lot of ground support. They're flying a majority of the sorties that were targeting the Islamic State there. They have excellent optics packages on these aircraft. Great precision strike capability. They're able to carry pretty much any munition you really would need for any kind of significant damage for precision strikes. So the F-16 is I think a fantastic platform, and Bookham says if Ukraine gets Western aircraft, it'll probably be the F-16s, and that's true. The F-16 is one of the most widespread platforms of a NATO aircraft. It is a little bit older, but it's a very successful aircraft. It's battle proven. We know it's a capable airframe. We know it's capable in all of its roles. And there's a lot of them. We can supply F-16s, and the Air Force and the Marine Corps and the Navy are transitioning into the F-35, so it would be a good excuse to get those orders of F-35s out sooner, to get them fielded sooner to replace their stockpiles, so you could put more emphasis on that, which then gives the F-35 program, which has run over budget and over time by pretty extreme amounts, some actual kind of purpose instead of whatever they're doing now. But yes, I think the F-16 is a perfect match. I think the F-16 would be an amazing thing for Ukraine to get, and I think it would be great for them because it serves both roles. It would smoke Russian aircraft out of the sky, which is what it was designed to do, and then it could immediately turn around. They could fix, JDAMs to the bottom of it, some laser-guided JDAMs, or some just dumb. They don't really need them. They could just do dumb drop Mark 82s and just flatten Russian troops. And they have much more successful countermeasure capabilities too, usually speaking. Not to say it's perfect. I definitely think they would lose some, but I think it's worthy. I think the F-16 is the most worthy of the airframes. Either that or the F-18s. The F-18 Hornet would be a really good fit too, even though it's a naval aircraft and a naval fighter aircraft. I think the F-18, we do have a significant number of them, especially in the Boneyard. I think that would be a good fit too. The F-18 Hornet or Super Hornet, because you want to give them the EF variants. You really don't want to give them A through D. It's just those had some reliability issues. We see good initiative, but very bad judgment from the Russians here. So we've seen the additional armor, the additional cage armor onto tanks. It's even something the United States did. But the Russians take it to a new extreme. We've seen cope cages. They don't work against the Javelin and really anything with a tandem warhead. They're best used against RPG fire. But they've decided to employ a new tactic, the Russians have. They've decided that cage armor was not enough, and they've attached a flaming bucket to their tank. I wish I could make this up, but I cannot. Now, there's a purpose. I don't think it's good deductive reasoning, but there's a purpose behind this. So they have cage armor, and you can see that they have reactive armor on the front ends of this too. They have cage armor and reactive armor on this thing. It's a T-72. You can tell that by the snorkeling gear here in the back. It's got a massive amount of cage armor around it, which, by the way, negates the point of having an anti-aircraft gun on the top of your tank. In case you didn't know, that's actually the gun on the top of the tank. That's usually like a 50 cal or whatever. You have a coaxial gun for ground targets. That's actually an anti-aircraft weapon, which is why the United States is upgrading it to like a 30 caliber chain gun, or a 30 millimeter chain gun, automatic cannon, for the Abrams X. Is because it needs to be able to engage low aircraft, because aircraft will absolutely destroy tanks. Never said it was good, but it's better to have something than nothing. Now, the Russians have put cage armor all around this tank. This poor tank has been, even for a T-Series tank, has been just brutalized by whatever these engineers thought of putting together here. But the point of the bucket, you can see that the bucket is on fire. There's a point. It's not good, but there's a point. The way that the Javelin works, and I'm trying to think here on what I can say that isn't classified. So I'm trying to put this carefully. The way a Javelin works is you lock on to a heat signature. So the point of having, so that's really, so that's what ends up, so that's what, like, tanks with their exhaust and everything in the crew compartment, it gets hot, it gets warm, and it sticks out like a spotlight in a dark room when you're looking through the Javelin system. It's really very much clear when there's like a vehicle there, especially if it's running. The point of having the bucket on the back of this is the fact that it provides a heat signature that a Javelin could then lock onto, and it would hit behind the tank and it wouldn't hit the tank. The issue with that deductive reasoning is the fact that tanks are very big. Even the low-profile T-Series tanks are very big objects. And anyone... First of all, you can't... Like, you have to be able to see and know what you're talking about, or know what you're looking at when it comes to being a Javelin gunner. And we see a very high successful hit rates with the Javelins in Ukraine, even higher than American standards with the Javelin for successful gunnery. And so you're going to know if something is a heat signature, but it's not a vehicle. The sights inside of the Javelin are actually scaled to the T-72, so that way you can identify it from different angles and range it. The basis of the sights for both the tow system and the Javelin are T-72 tanks, because it ranges it to the max range of the Javelin, and you can get profile, and you can range it using the profile of the vehicle. So anyone that picks up that heat signature is going to immediately recognize that that's not a tank, or an armored vehicle, and at best maybe a person, which isn't worth wasting your Javelin on. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, you're not going to waste a Javelin on it, on like a single guy. So that only works, though, if the tank is off and it's been sitting there and it's now absolutely bone-chilling cold. In which case, the Javelin probably wouldn't hit it anyway, because it would be able to lock onto the heat signature, because it would be able to identify that specific target based off of the heat signature. So, that's okay. I can't go any further on that point, but that's how the Javelin works in essence. So these guys, it's getting ready to roll into winter. These guys probably aren't going to have their engine off, especially if they're engaging a target. So the tank is going to be, even, the engine, the gun, everything on this, the people inside, their ambient just like heat is going to heat up this tank. And they're going to be able to see it with an anti-tank missile, which is specifically designed to pick up infrared light and the heat. So yes, it will be hot. This will do nothing. It's a good initiative. It's a step in the right direction for the Russians, but really to fool a javelin, or better stated, to fool the gunner of a javelin, you just need something that looks exactly like a tank, is as big as a tank, and as hot as a tank for them to shoot at. And that's just not a capable dummy. So it's not really going to work. Also, if cage armor is only good against RPGs, generally speaking, like it's only really good against like RPGs, single charge warheads. If your tank cannot withstand RPG fire, your tank sucks, and you need a better tank. It's a light anti-armor. It's a light to a medium anti-armor weapon. It should not penetrate a T-series tank. It should not. Tanks have a armor thickness, if you include the slope angle, of up to a meter thick of armor. Should be no way a single charge warhead is doing significant damage to cause a catastrophic kill on a tank. So if you got to put that much cage armor on your tank to protect it, you probably should just have designed a better tank. Because it means that you suck. And you suck bad. A little interesting development here. We see a hamster rescued. So there was a lot of pets that had to be left behind. And big and small. Cats, dogs. And we see... now we see, of course, a hamster. And so it was rescued by some Ukrainian forces. Take a look.
Короче, Сантик решил проявить сострадание. У нас операция по эвакуации хомяка.
Эвакуация.
Спасли хомяка, короче, с передка. Королевский классный хомяк. Давай, грузи, поехали.
Bookums says strikers use cages to defeat RPGs. Yes, but let's see the difference between a striker and a tank. And so, we take a look at the Book of Basic Knowledge. This, for those that may be new to the channel, this is my actual manual. This is my training book that I received when I went through my anti-tank missilements course. And it is the actual anti-tank missilements course. You can see it there. And one of the major things is armor ID and understanding the different what the armor is capable of. Both NATO, allied, and enemy countries. So that way you can properly ID all vehicles. And similarities and differences. For instance, everything that China ever produces is a cheap knockoff of anybody else. Just like they have Legos with 2 Gs, their tank is essentially the same thing. Their jets are essentially knockoff F-35s or Su-57s. Like, they really suck. And so, so anyway, so let's take a look at the T-72 first. The T-72 is the basis, it's like the baseline of any Eastern type of country's tank. The Type 85 TAC-3, which is the Chinese tank, is based off of the T-72 series. And so, if you take a look here, British tank, British tank, British tank, give me Russian tank. Man, that's a lot of countries that use this thing. So we see, Uses armor consists of homogeneous cold rolled steel and ceramic mix with a V-shaped mudguard on the hull. It's fitted with an exhaust port in the left upper rear, similar to the T55 and T62. It has a low, well-sloped turret with a PKT 762 coaxial machine gun and IR. Okay, cool, whatever. Uses extensive use of explosive reactive armor. And let's see here. Main battle tank. Can we please get definition? Streamline absence of a bore evacuator located at the forward center bow. Metal skirt. Processing. Glacial plates. Deflector. Alright, tanks. So, up to the equivalent of 1,000 millimeters of armor, including slope angle. So, that's T-72. And then if we take a look here, we go over to the Striker. So I got to go to my second block, which is infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. Please give me Striker. All right, the Striker. Similar to the LAV, football-shaped front hull. Cool. Okay. But the Striker, however, because you can see it in a big difference. Like the T-72 weighs like 42 tons. And it weighs like over 40 tons. The Striker only weighs 19. And the reason why it only weighs 19 is because on average, it's going to have only between 12 to 25 millimeters of armor versus a meter thick. So that's why Strikers need, because 12 to 25 millimeters of armor are going to require you to need additional protection. Because medium and light anti-armor weapons are meant to punch through that. So to give you an idea, the AT-4, which is an 84 millimeter rocket, the Carl Gustav, the M3 Carl Gustav, an 84 millimeter recoilless rifle, anti-tank rifle, the Law light anti-armor weapon, the M72, those RPG-7, RPG-26s, those are all meant to destroy. Those are all considered light anti-armor weapons. The point of them is to destroy infantry fighting vehicles, reconnaissance vehicles, and armor personnel carriers. Things that have thin armor, or even things like self-propelled guns and anti-aircraft platforms. Generally speaking, anti-aircraft platforms and self-propelled guns have very thin armor. They may look like tanks, but they are not tanks. They do not have very thick armor. They just prevent basically shrapnel and small arms fire from penetrating them. But anything with any kind of a actual decent sized gun is going to put a hole right through it, like it's butter, hot knife through butter. A tank, on the other hand, is very thick. It has very thick, well-rolled, homogeneous steel. It's 10 times thicker, 5 to 10 times thicker, depending on the vehicle, of armor plating. And it also has its slope angles actually determine, add additional type of protection to it for deflection. And to mitigate the actual ability of it mitigates penetration through diffusing the impact of the round. It's a lot of mathematics that even I don't understand. I just know how in essence it works, but a javelin really doesn't care, so I don't have to truly worry about it too much. It's more of a tank on tank gunnery thing to understand that. But so you have like light anti-armor weapons, which is like what I already described. The AT-4, the Law, the RPG-26, RPG-7, that kind of thing. Carl Gustav. Then you go up and you go to a medium anti-armor weapon, which is something like the Javelin. It's medium range. You got some pretty good range on it, but it's still man-portable. It's a medium anti-armor weapon. and it will defeat pretty much any tank on the battlefield. But it doesn't have the standoff range that other things were going to have, like the tow missile. The mighty tow missile, like I got back there, that's a TOW-2 Bravo. Sorry, TOW-2 Alpha. So that thing, right, that thing has a lot more standoff. That is considered a heavy anti-armor weapon. It will punch through anything you want it. There's different variants of it. You can have a flyover shoot down effect. You can hit bunkers with it. There's literally a bunker buster version of the tow missile. So you can destroy hard emplacements and fixed infrastructure, defensive emplacements and infrastructure there. You can hit, you can have the flyover shoot down effect. You can do direct impact. And that thing, some of these missiles for the tow missile, for instance, outrange the main tank gun on a Russian tank, which Russian tanks, their main tank guns are about 4 kilometers for the maximum effective range. And some tow missiles outrange that. That's why they're considered heavy anti-armor weapons. So that's why. Strikers have a purpose for having that cage armor, because they can't survive light and medium anti-armor weapons. Tanks are meant to be able to survive light anti-armor weapons, which is why we had to build medium and heavy ones. So that's why it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The precursor detonation doesn't do anything because medium and heavy anti-tank weapons have tandem warheads that their entire purpose is to punch through stuff like that, which is why they always kill the tank. We see a pretty clean shot, speaking of the Javelin here. We see a pretty clean shot about this. This is a Ukrainian Javelin gunner taking a shot off the back of the Humvee. He's literally sitting on the transport case for the Javelin when he's taking this shot, and he's resting it there on the hood, or on the top of the Humvee. But he did successfully destroy a Russian armored vehicle with this. And it's a very clean Javelin shot. It's a very good one. So anyway, take a look.
Пошла! Пошла, сука! Yeah!
You can see that tiny little smoke cloud there in the distance. That's so someone guesstimated this range to be about 800 meters of an engagement range. But it gives you a really good look at how the Javelin works if you guys have never seen it, and how it actually fires. So the Javelin actually has 2 motors. There's a motor that kicks out the missile right there. And then that's called the launch motor. It kicks it out of the tube, and then it drops. It kind of dips. It has this nosedive kind of thing. But then you see, where as it comes over here, you see a puff of smoke. That's the flight motor kicking in. That's what sends the missile up. Because it flies to pretty high top MSL, and then it drops using gravity onto the target. So it's pretty cool. I mean, it adjusts itself in flight, but yeah. So it's pretty cool. It's a really good video of how the Javelin actually fires. If you guys have never seen one, there's a lot of videos of that out there if you're kind of curious and want to have a little bit of a better angle on it, though. Something else we see when it comes to like Western weaponry and stuff here, we see. Bookham says he thought the Humvees would make a comeback as a combat vehicle. They needed to make a comeback? Are you kidding me? Have you seen the Iraqi army runs Humvees? The Syrians run Humvees? We run Humvees? Are you kidding me? The Humvee is still a combat. I've spent more time in a Humvee than I have in an office. And I work in an office. As a civilian. That's what I do. I work in an office. And I've still spent more time in a Humvee. Hands down. It's still a combat vehicle. What are you talking about? Old Bessie may be feeling like she's re-entering Earth's atmosphere at 55 miles an hour, but she's still reliable. Well, as long as she's maintained. I did switch the lights on a Humvee one time when I was checking it out for pre-tripping, and it caught the engine bay on fire when I switched on the lights. Bookham says, aren't MRAPs a replacement? MRAPs are only really used overseas, especially by the Marine Corps. They're too expensive. The Marine Corps hasn't procured enough of them. And so, at least the Marine Corps, like the Marine Corps is supposed to be getting a bunch of things called JLTVs. There's a project we spearheaded, even though we still haven't gotten MAPVs, MRAPs, Max Pros. We haven't gotten those things in large quantities. We're still training with Humvees and stuff, like not on MRAPs or anything. So I'd never stepped foot into an MRAP until I went in country. Ever. I never had been inside of an MRAP before until I deployed. And that's the first time I ever got into an MRAP, saw an MRAP, anything like that. So, yeah. But anyway, as we see here, this is a Ukrainian artillery team, and they're conducting what's called a shoot and scoot. It's very effective for the Ukrainians to conduct these shoot and scoots. It minimizes the chances that they get struck with counter battery fire from the Russians. And it really, so the M777, which is what they're using here, and is what a lot of Ukrainian artillery units are using, is the M777 155 millimeter towed artillery gun. It's the same one used by the United States and many of our coalition partners. And the AC never works. Yeah, you ever seen a thermometer max out on a Humvee? You ever seen a thermometer max out, period? I have. McCree, 2017. God awful. Anyway. Anyway, hey, so the Ukrainians, they don't have a numerical superiority. NATO doesn't have a numerical superiority, artillery-wise. We don't need to. The point of a M777 and the 155 millimeter gun is it fires at a farther range. Roughly, they are going about 5 kilometers with just basic HE shells. They actually have a standoff distance of about 5 kilometers from Russian artillery batteries, such as the D-30. And so as a result, the Russians have to get well within the threat envelope or the threat area of what the Ukrainians can fire before they can even begin to shoot back. And by the time they've done that and they've set up their artillery battery and prepped and done all of the math whizzes there sitting in the FC, the fire control or whatever, they're able to, the Ukrainians are able to pick up, they literally set up, they fire some rounds, they can do the fire mission, they displace immediately. It's called a shoot and scoot. And what this does is it means that these much larger, less maneuverable Russian forces, while it mitigates their supremacy of numbers. Because they're hitting empty fields with counter battery fire. The larger Russian artillery battalions are unwieldy to move. There's so many moving parts. There's so much logistics that have to support them and move with them that they aren't flexible on the battlefield. They're not maneuverable. So you see the Russians really emplacing in relatively fixed areas without a lot of maneuver. And the Ukrainians, they're maneuvering all over the place, and they can stay outside the range of a lot of Russian weapon systems. So it's a very careful cat and mouse game. It's a very careful dance, but it mitigates the Russian numbers of artillery. It mitigates their effectiveness and that advantage that they have in numbers. They make up for in other areas. But take a look. This is a Ukrainian M777 artillery crew here in the Donbass.
Виліз. Заряд зарядиш. Один снаряд, вогонь! Постріл!
See, they go out there, they fire their mission of 6 rounds, they leave. Guess what? It's real hard to shoot back at somebody if they're not there. Bookham says, or going back, or still on the Humvee thing, Bookham says Humvees weren't trusted. Humvees can be trusted. They're older, but they're still good. They're still good vehicles. I want a Humvee. I want to buy one. But there's a lot of stuff that I got to do before I go and buy myself a Humvee. But I do see them at government auctions, so the Wojak face off the front of the truck. I know that kills me every time. I don't know if you noticed the front of this truck, but it is. For those who don't know, that's a meme called the Wojak face. Her Wojak. I'm seeing it with a lot of Polish memes right now. It is hilarious. Yeah. 10 out of 10. That's, yes. Down here in Melitopol, Russia is enforcing citizenship on Ukrainians here in Zaporizhia Oblast. Down here in Melitopol, the Melitopol mayor Ivan Fedorov reported that residents of Zaporizhia will automatically receive Russian citizenship. Locals who previously refused to accept Russian passports were threatened with forced mobilization. This once again coming from the Kiev Independent. And up here in Enerhodar, we're at the nuclear power plant here, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Thousands of employees refused to collaborate with Russia. Ukrainian state energy operator Energoatom reported that around 100 of the 6,700 employees of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant signed contracts with Russia, with the rest of them, roughly about 6,600 of them, refusing to collaborate despite coercion. Once again, coming from the Kiev Independent. Down here and along along the front lines. This is partially in Kherson, partially in Odessa Oblast. But quote, on the morning of October the 27th, the armed forces of Ukraine shot down a Russian Su-25 attack aircraft and Russian helicopter K-52 in the Kherson and Odessa regions. That's coming from the press service of the Air Force Command of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And over here in Odessa, we get some grain corridor updates. Quote, on October the 27th, 7 more ships left Ukrainian ports Chernomorsk and Privdeny through the grain corridor. 102,000 tons of Ukrainian agricultural products are on board, heading to countries in Europe, Asia, and Africa. And since August the 1st, 397 ships have exported about 9 million tons of Ukrainian agricultural products to countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe through the ports of Odessa. And we do see that update from the official Twitter coming from the Ministry of Infrastructure. And we see Inouye there being loaded up. And quote, on October the 28th, 6 more ships left Ukrainian ports Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Privdeny through the grain corridor. 180,000 tons of Ukrainian agricultural products are on board, heading to countries of Europe, Africa, and Asia. Once again, coming from the official Twitter of the Ministry of Infrastructure. And then we can see Lima there being loaded up and getting ready to be pulled out to sea. So a lot of good coming out of that grain corridor. And another ship, my understanding is another ship did end up actually arriving in Africa and is currently being unloaded with humanitarian aid headed to places such as Ethiopia and Somalia. But that's actually it for everything inside of Ukraine. But don't worry, there's plenty of other stuff that's happening outside of Ukraine too. And we actually start off with an interesting development. This is in the border town of Shebekino in the Belgorod Oblast of Russia, where a Russian army fuel truck collided with a civilian vehicle in Shebekino, resulting in 7 people being killed and an additional 3 being injured. And we do have some pretty horrific photos of this. You can see the fuel truck ended up colliding with that civilian truck, and it burst into flames. And then as we swiftly move down here and into the Middle East, we have several different developments. The first one is coming from the West Bank, and this is coming from the city of Hawara here in the West Bank. A gunman was killed in an attempted attack. A gunman killed in an attempted shooting attack on the IDF, or Israeli Defense Forces, near the village of Hawara in the West Bank, south of Nablus. Two vehicles approached the Israeli Defense Forces position, and a gunman fired at them before one of them being killed by the Israeli forces. You can see this coming from the Jerusalem Post. There has been a lot of tensions between Palestinians and Israelis, which has flared up even more than usual over the last few months, really since the conflict in Ukraine started. And a lot of other issues are starting to show their heads in this area. We're seeing a lot of terror attacks. We saw a lot of stuff happening on the part of the Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli police, which is definitely objectionable, to say the least, in how they're handling the situation in some of these areas. So it's a very tense situation between both groups here, who have never truly gotten along. It's not the only thing. At least 4 people were killed just across the border from Israel and Syria. In the city of Dara, at least 4 people killed in a suicide attack. There was a suicide attack on the house of a former FSA commander, Ghazan Abazid, who was meeting where a meeting of the commanders of the examples was held. According to available data, at least 4 people were killed and 6 more were injured. All those killed turned out to be FSA commanders: Malik Al-Sami Abazid, Malik Abu Zayed Abazid, Yazin Faluj Abu Fisal, and Ahmed Al-Fandi Al-Abazid. As we jump up here into Deir ez-Zor, which is here along the Middle Euphrates River Valley, residents protests over people being wrongly accused. Protesters have been going on for several days in a number of localities under the control of the PKK in the province of Deir ez-Zor, demanding that release of falsely accused residents of these areas, as well as reducing corruption and improving living conditions. Kurdish formations under pressure from the population have already released 5 people who were arrested under the pretext of fighting Islamic State 2 months ago. Let's see some of these protests here. But I'm talking about, I remember the American turret gunner running out of ammo, and they kept handing him AT-4s instead. Can I offer you an AT-4 in this trying time? One of my favorite memes out there right now is the "Can I offer you an AT-4 in this trying time?" Top 5 combat footage I've seen. Yes. Hey man, there's no better thing than rounds down range. 50 cal AT-4 doesn't matter. Rounds down range. As long as rounds are going down range, it's a good day. If it's coming back, not a good day. But if they're going out, I don't want your presence. I'm a giver, not a receiver, you know? You can have my bullets. I don't want yours. I don't need the ammo. But you can see there the ongoing protests. Now, I spent quite a bit of time in Syria with the SDF. And they're saying it's under PKK control. Deir ez-Zor is under the SDF control, not the PKK. Now, it's very interesting. The sources that we have, a lot of them seem to be pro-Turkish. And you can tell that in the rhetoric, and I'm having a hard time finding other ones. But the groups that are here are not the PKK. The PKK is a Kurdish Marxist organization. But you have the Syrian Democratic Forces in this region, which control Deir ez-Zor, which is controlled by the YPK, which is a totally different organization. And that's broken down into the YPG and YPJ. Let's see. And their stuff looks like this. So this is my YPG patch that I got from one of the guys I made friends with when I was there. But the YPG and YPJ are two totally different groups. They're not part of the BKK. They're totally different groups. They do get along with each other because they are Kurdish. But that's about as far as of an extent as they go. So what we end up seeing, professional lurker. What we end up seeing here is kind of a misnaming. Is kind of misnaming the group here, based off of a bias. And unfortunately, it's very hard to find a source about these organizations that doesn't have a bias. But they're not perfect. A lot of them are great individuals, but as an organization, they're not perfect. And I think that's safe to say with any organization. And the Islamic State in this area has a lot of cells, a lot of people. In fact, there's some in Shidati. When I was there, we called them the Blue Door House. And then they were like 300 meters off our wire, and they sat there on their front porch and watched us and hit, and were making murder holes in the walls of their compound the whole time I was there. Arch Instinct says our cat is funny. Yes, I know. Our cat is very funny. Anyway, moving on with the news, we come over here into Afghanistan, where we move over to the northern city of Herat, where we see 6 Taliban were killed by the Islamic State militants. Militants killed 6 Taliban and wounded 15 more in an attack on the 15th quarter of Herat. So those killed were reportedly members of the so-called Al-Farouk Special Unit. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for an attack on a bus carrying Taliban special forces in Herat. According to an updated information, a terrorist with the small arms and grenades ambushed a bus. Islamists claim 10 killed and wounded in the attack. Local sources write about 6 killed and 15 wounded. The attacker managed to escape from the scene of the incident before the arrival of reinforcements of the security forces. And we do get that. This is the Islamic State claiming responsibility for that attack. Down here in Africa, we have a couple of different updates. Up here in the northern part of Ethiopia, an ambulance driver was killed by unnamed forces. Ethiopian Red Cross Society, or ERCS, part of the International Committee of the Red Cross, condemned the killing of an ambulance driver along with injured patients in the vehicle by unnamed armed forces. This is coming from the Ethiopian Committee of the Red Cross. This comes as hostilities have simmered down a little bit, but are still ongoing as peace talks are currently occurring there and in South Africa. And over here, this is in Jijiga. Federal police officer. This is supposed to be in it's supposed to be in Somalia, but I have no idea where it is in Somalia, so I apologize. Anyway, federal police officers shot and killed a member of the ruling Prosperity Party Central Committee in Somali Region State Parliament, Jawaria Subsis, inside the Jigjiga Gorand Wawal Airport on 10/25. The victim's sister and a regional cabinet member were severely injured. The deputy chief of security of Somalia Regional State reported that the member of parliament was killed deliberately and police officer acted on his own. It was reported that there was a quarrel between the member of parliament and the police officer. The killing was reportedly not political. And this is coming from the Addis Standard. And over here, in the Shabelle province of Somalia, Al-Shabaab militants were killed in an operation. 17 Al-Shabaab militants, including senior members, were killed in a planned security operation conducted by National Intelligence Security Security Agency, or NISA, and Somalia's international security partners on 10/25. That is coming from, that is the official readout from Somali Federal Republic. And also coming from the Addis Standard once again. Over in Uganda, we do get an update regarding Ebola, the Ebola outbreak that has been ravaging the country. The Ministry of Health reported that there are 109 confirmed cases, among whom 45 are under treatment, 34 have improved, and 30 have died. 15 out of 109 cases are healthcare workers, and 6 out of 15 died. Treatment has set up 3 more Ebola the government has set up 3 more Ebola treatment facilities and is in the process of building up another 64-bed hospital in the coming months. Jump over here and into Mexico, where we see a same-sex marriage has been legalized in all of Mexico. Lawmakers in the border state of Tamaulipas voted Wednesday night to legalize same-sex marriages, becoming the last of Mexico's 32 states to authorize such unions. The measure to amend the state's civil code passed with 23 votes in favor, 12 against, and 2 abstentions, setting off cheers of "Yes, we can" from supporters of the change. The President's Supreme Court, Arturo Zaldivar, welcomed the vote. The whole country shines with a huge rainbow. Live the dignity and rights of all people. Love is love, he said on Twitter. Up here in San Francisco, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband was assaulted during a home invasion. An intruder demanding to see U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi broke into her San Francisco home and attacked her husband with a hammer early on Friday. Paul Pelosi, 82, was taken to San Francisco hospital where he underwent surgery for a skull fracture and injuries to his right arm and hands. Doctors expect Mr. Pelosi to make a full recovery. The man arrested at the scene was identified as David DePape, 42. He was booked into San Francisco County Jail on suspicion of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, elder abuse, battery, burglary, and other felonies. Over here in Washington, D.C., a $275 million additional assistance package is headed to Ukraine. The U.S. Department of Defense announced this authorization of security assistance valued at up to $275 million to meet Ukraine's security and defense needs. The package includes additional HIMARS, precision-guided 155mm artillery shells, RAM systems, and Humvees, among others. And we can actually take a look here. So far, according to what has been stated here, this is from the Department of Defense. Additional ammunition for so they say that the capabilities of this package include additional ammunition for high mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, 500 precision-guided 155 artillery rounds, and those are the Excalibur, 2,155mm rounds of remote anti-armor mine, or RAM systems, more than 1,300 anti-armor systems, 125 high-mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, which is Humvees, small arms, and more than 2,750,000 rounds of small arms ammunition, and 4 satellite communications antennas. So you're going to see another package going out from the US DoD. And up in Ottawa, more sanctions have been announced against Russia. Canada announced new sanctions against 35 Russian officials, including the Russian Deputy Prime Minister, 6 energy entities, and Gazprom. Canada is also selling a 5-year bond to raise money for Ukraine. We get this also, once again, from the Kiev Independent. And finally, that allows us to talk about some more uplifting news. And first thing we have here, this is coming out of Oklahoma. Chasing the Sprites. NASA scientists captured the site of Sprites in Oklahoma after hours of pursuing it and seeking the best location. Sprite is one of the least understood electrical phenomena in Earth's upper atmosphere. It materializes around 45 miles above the ground or higher. The clusters can stretch 10 miles across and 30 miles from top to bottom. Sprites appear above thunderstorms and can be observed several hundred miles away from the storm. Spectacular is NASA's newest citizen science project to leverage the public's input on to understand more about this electrical phenomena. And so that is a Sprite. That's really cool looking. I have never seen something like that in person. So that's pretty cool. But that is a Sprite, apparently. And you can see him once again there. Coming from NASA. And if you want to check out more or possibly provide input, if you may have the expertise, you have spectacular.org there that you can go to. And to end the night on kind of an adorable note, we actually jump over here to the Goddard Space Flight Center, where NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory released a picture of a seemingly smiling sun. The picture was seen through ultraviolet light. The darker patches that made up the smile were known as coronal holes, where fast solar winds gushed out into space. But it is very adorable. Come on. Is that not an adorable face? That is the sun smiling at you. If that doesn't make your day, I don't know what will. So hopefully that ends the night on a little bit more of a cheerful note. And I'm actually going to leave it on here for once. Because I think it's a kind of a cute picture to leave it on for the night. And so that is everything in the news for the past last 48 hours. So at least everything that we're covering. There's some other interesting ones. There is one about the Russians at the United Nations today regarding weaponized mosquitoes. I'm gonna let NAFO meme that one to death. I don't think that needed covered today. And with that, we're going to go ahead and call it a night. I hope that you guys have enjoyed over the last, covering the last 48 hours of news, or maybe you've not enjoyed, maybe at least found it informative and knowledgeable. Appreciate all the questions that you guys asked. I hope I was able to answer those at least to a reasonable degree and with some pretty consistent accuracy on that. And I hope that you guys have remained safe. I hope that you guys do remain safe and that your family and your friends remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. Please be safe over the next night. I hope you've enjoyed your Friday night. We'll be back on air tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central to cover the latest news and to give some of our viewers in other places a little bit of a better opportunity. I know it can be late for many of you guys to do it here at the time we are doing it. But if you could, please be sure to check out the video description below, and please give as much to these organizations as you can. 80% or more of the donations that the organizations in the description receive go directly to the programs and directly to helping people. So they're not going to pay for those salaries. 100% of everything we're trying to do here is to raise charity, and we want to have an impact, a meaningful and good, wholesome impact on people's lives throughout the world affected by these very same news stories that we talk about every single day. And with that, I hope that you guys will help us in that endeavor. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Please help us grow this project. The more people that come here and become informed, the more of an impact we will have on people's lives throughout the world. So please give us a like and subscribe. Let your friends and communities know about us. And hopefully we'll be able to put our goal right now is to put a fundraiser directly onto the live streams on every single live stream we do. We do have a long way to go from that, but so far you guys have built an amazing community here, and I really appreciate all the support you have given us, and even more so to the organizations below. With that, my name is Paul from the New News, and have a fantastic rest of your night, everybody. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас зустрічаємо з погромом. І стоять до повноваги, чудо кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ. тисячі вже полягло, і все більше швехуйло, то для них нема нічого, крім труни. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кем плечом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11 and shove it up your wrinkle bomb. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Идите нахуй!